Great. Okay, morning everyone. So my name's Charles Lane. I work for Fera Science Limited, and I have to say I've had the joy of being involved in the project from its very early days, which has been a real pleasure, and it's a great project. So it's really nice to speak to you today. So I'm a plant health consultant. I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Biology, and I'm a professional member of the Arb Association. So it's really nice to be talking trees today. So we'll get into the presentation. Just thought it might be helpful just to remind you of what we're talking about today, and that's the priority pests and diseases. When the project was first initiated, we had 20 of these, and there's a lovely mixture of different pests and pathogens. I probably should apologise for my language at the start. Being a pathologist, I get great joy at looking at all the different pests and pathogens. So apologise if I get rather excited about the range of different organisms, symptoms and signs that you're going to see today. So this is an excellent slide just to remind you of all the different pests and pathogens that we ask our volunteers to look for and we report back on. So I think it's worth just sort of setting the scene, obviously with the publication of the GB strategy in 2023, for 2023 to 2028. This is an excellent presentation and slide that shows the number of cumulative increase in the number of new pest and disease outbreaks since 1971. And you can see there was a sort of steady rise from 1971 up to about sort of 1993, and then there was a sort of significant kick in 1993 up to the present day. And you can see there's a steady climb. You might think it's possibly flattening off at the top, but you can see there has been quite a range of different pests and diseases we have encountered in the past 50 years. Might be quite interesting to look at some of the detail on there. 1971, that was probably my first encounter with a tree health disease, was Dutch elm disease. I remember coming back to the school playground and wondered why all the trees had cut down. I now realise that is due to Dutch elm disease. And as you can see, there's things like great spruce bark beetle in there, Dophistroma needle blight, horse chestnut leaf miner, oak processionary moth, acute oak decline, Phytophthora lateralis, ash dieback, Asian longhorn beetle, and as you can see, the list goes on up to the current day. So there has been quite a significant increase in the number of interceptions. Obviously, 1993 was the formation of the single EC market, where there was a step change in the level of surveillance and checking for different pests and diseases. Obviously, there's also a globalization of trade, and there's also a large amount of trade being moved back and forth. So that's some of the reasons why we're seeing those increase in pest and disease outbreaks. So the DEFRA Plant Health Portal is a fascinating source of information for all of you, those who are interested in plant health and biosecurity and in tree health. And you can see in the top right-hand corner, there's a variety of different resources in there you can look for. So pests and disease is a really good place to go. But also in there is a link to the UK Plant Health Information Portal, which also has the UK Risk Register on there. So following the outbreak of ash dieback in 2012, there was a major review and refresh of plant health and biosecurity, and one of the great positive outcomes of that was the formation of the UK Plant Health Risk Register. Up until then, we probably had about 300 notifiable pests and diseases. We were aware of many, many more, but actually we didn't have that all shared in one space. We also didn't have it in the public domain as well, and I think that's been one of the really good things about the Risk Register, is put all that information into everybody's hands. It also encourages people to interact with the Risk Register, and since its formation, we started off with 800 different pests and diseases, and I think now we're currently up to 1,400. So we're probably adding between sort of 1 to 200 new pests and pathogens every year. So you can search in there, search for pest or organism. You can search by common name, you can search by the Latin name or part of it, and it will help you through the process. You can download that entire risk register. If particularly, say, you're interested in a specific host, you could see all the pests and diseases listed on that host. So it's a very flexible, very approachable way of looking for information that you are concerned about. The other thing that I also think is very helpful as well, there's a a column in there called Risk Register News. And normally, probably every month or every other month, there is an update to the UK Risk Register. So if you are concerned about any specific pest or disease, or you want to find out the latest information, the UK Risk Register is a great place to go to start your investigation and gather your information. There's lots of links and lots of useful information in there. So the risk register is running at about 1,400 different pests and pathogens at the moment. This is an example. I've picked one here. This is the Anoplophila glabioprensis, the Asian longhorn beetle, and this is typically the information that you'll pull up. You get the common name. It'll also tell you how it might be introduced into this country via, say, wood packaging material, and it'll talk about common pathways. One of the things I particularly wanted just to draw your attention to is that the risk analysts within DEFRA and colleagues carry out an initial risk assessment, which they call the unmitigated risk. So, for example, here, the unmitigated risk is actually 80 out of a score of 125. So it is quite a high pest of concern, hence the score of 80. In the middle column, you'll see the different mitigations that are possible: regulation, surveillance, industry schemes, contingency plan, awareness and research. And a result of taking all those activities, there is a mitigated risk. So if we were to do all of those things, we can reduce the risk from red at 80 down to 40, which is still of concern and still of worry. But obviously by putting actions in place, we can significantly reduce the risk. So any of the pests or pathogens you're interested, I'd encourage you, go and have a look at the UK Risk Register. You can look at unmitigated risks, you can look at mitigated risks, but also important, you can see the countries it occurs in, and you can see the range of different hosts it might happen on, and then establish where there is any statutory action. So if you've not engaged with the Risk Register, definitely something to have a look at. So we have 1,400 pests and pathogens on the UK Risk Register. So we have to go back and think, well, what have we got? We have 20, we originally started the project just under 10 years ago with 20 pests and diseases. And these were selected from a list of relatively impactful pests and pathogens of concern, organisms with good features that made them diagnostic, and also on hosts of concern. But since then, obviously, as we've seen, the risk register has grown from 800 to 1,400. We have identified a number of other new concerning pests and pathogens that we want surveillance data on. And this includes European mountain ash ring spot associated virus, elm zigzag sawfly, and beech leaf disease. But again, looking at that list of 23, we have a nice mix of organisms that are not known to occur in this country, and that's 9 of them. Say, for example, the bronze birch borer, the emerald ash borer. We have a list of 13 which do occur in this country. Some, unfortunately, now are quite widespread, like horse chestnut leaf miner or ash dieback, where others have more limited distribution. We have great concerns about their spread, for example, the oriental chestnut gallwasp. So it's a good mix of presence and absence across the UK. Again, when we think about the 1,400 pests and pathogens on the UK Risk Register, there is actually a list of priority pests. These are the ones of the greatest concern, not only to the EU, but also to the UK. So I think there's about 25 of those at recollection, but without counting up. What I've done, I've highlighted in yellow those organisms which are of tree health concern. The others are of general plant health concern, say like rose rosette virus, obviously not a tree health concern. And then if it's yellow and with a star, that is one of our Observatree Priority pests and diseases. So for that high list of priority pests, we've obviously got the Agrilla species, things like the Asian longhorn beetle, the Asian and citrus longhorn beetle. We've got plain wilt. We've got the oak and pine processionary moth. So there's a good range of high-profile priority pests which are a part of the Observatree project. So these again go, so on that list of 23, why do we still have ash dieback and why do we still have horse chestnut leaf miner? You know, horse chestnut leaf miner in England is everywhere. Why do we need to gather surveillance data? Ash dieback now, it is, everywhere ash is grown. Well, I think the interesting thing there is if you look through the eyes of a new volunteer who's joining the project, it can be quite daunting to go and look for many of these different pests and pathogens. Hopefully, they may have seen horse chestnut leaf miner before. It's a very easy identifiable host, and it's a very diagnostic symptom on the leaves. So for someone who's starting out in their life as a citizen scientist and a volunteer, then actually horse chestnut leaf miner allows them to spend time to look for something, but also to exercise all the other skills that they need around good biosecurity, about identifying the tree, about recording its presence. So there's a lot of lessons and a lot of skills that can be exercised on a regular basis by horse chestnut leaf miner. Now, it may well be very prevalent in particularly where it started in southern England up through into England, but in parts of Scotland it is still rare or absent. So actually gathering that information can be very helpful indeed. Ash dieback again, we take ourselves back to 2012 when the disease was first found in this country. There was a huge amount of surveillance by the statutory plant health authorities to establish the distribution of ash dieback. Since then, we now know, unfortunately, has become quite widespread and quite damaging, but actually we're still very interested to understand the distribution of this organism across the whole of the UK. The statutory services have been pulled away to deal with more priority issues, say like oak processionary moth, plain wilt, sweet chestnut blight, etc. So actually citizen scientists can play a really valuable role in recording the presence of absence of ash dieback across the whole of the UK. And certainly a vast proportion of the recording in Wales of ash dieback has been done by observatory volunteers. So again, there's a role to play for these organisms which you may think are not important, but actually are really valuable to a project like ours. So what have we added? We've added the European mountain ash ring spot associated virus. We've added the elm zigzag sawfly. I love that picture in the middle. That must be the happiest insect I've ever seen in my life. It has such a smiley face on it, and that's the view of a pathologist. And then most recently, we've added the quite concerning beech leaf disease. So European mountain ash ring spot virus was known to occur in this country, but a very unknown distribution. We had a couple of occurrences and we wanted to establish how widespread it was across the UK. Unfortunately, it does appear through the work of statutory services and the citizen scientists like ourselves that it now is increasingly widespread across the UK. Elm zigzag sawfly still seems to be holding strong in southern Britain, but has yet to venture further north. And then beech leaf disease is a very worrying new disease that's been reported in North America. It's obviously an economically and aesthetically very valuable host, and the damage to the foliage can be quite dramatic. It's known to occur in North America and possibly Japan, and it's supposed to be actually due to a nematode. So again, quite an unusual pest to be concerned about, but beech leaf disease is something we've been actively looking for since 2021 in the project, supporting European research. I think the important thing to also remember is that if we're to escalate a pest or pathogen to the status of a priority pest and disease, then actually there's a huge amount of work that goes with it behind the scenes, but also for our volunteers as well. So this is example. This is for the mountain ash ring spot associated. We have an identification guide. We have a poster. We have training videos. We have detection guides. So a huge amount of effort goes into developing resources to support our volunteers. But also, there's a huge amount of effort for our volunteers to go and become skilled and knowledgeable and expert, not only in the identification of the host, but in the biosecurity procedures, and also in recognizing the pest or pathogen and being able to report it. So it is a big ask to raise the priority pest and disease pathogen, and we put a lot of effort on both sides of the party to make sure that works. Now, I think that has been very successful. This is some great data that has been provided to me by Peter most recently. This is looking at data from 2014 to 2022, where we've done the full analysis. And I think what's really, really good to see is that we have 13 priority pests and pathogens which are known to occur in the UK, and all 13 have been found by our volunteers. And it was interesting, I was reflecting on this data, and we get very excited about finding things. But I think just as importantly is also very important, we haven't found the other 9 different pests and diseases which are of a priority that do not occur in this country. So positive data is always very good, but actually the absence of something is just as important. So on this graph, you can see on the left-hand side, probably half the reports coming from the volunteers are actually not the priority pests and diseases, but other different pests and pathogens of concern. Ash dieback, not surprisingly, continues to be the most popular subject matter, followed probably by, I think, acute oak decline, horse chestnut leaf miner. But you can see we are routinely finding the 13 priority pests and diseases you would expect the volunteers to find. So that's very good validation of their skills and their ability and their willingness to report. And I think this graph, again, is very evident of that commitment from the volunteers about finding, looking, and hunting down these different pests and pathogens, but continuing to report them. So, for example, we talked about ash dieback. Some people may consider this rather old hat, rather last year, but actually it's really important we're continuing to make those survey reports. And you can see the continued commitment from the very early days right through the project for finding ash dieback, again, horse chestnut leaf miner. But interesting, some of the more recent ones that we've added, European mountain ash ring spot virus, we are finding it. It's not particularly prevalent. Oriental chestnut gall wasp, for example, that would be another, again, something that's been recently found in this country. So our volunteers are successfully finding it. So again, really nice to see that data, to see the level of effort, but also the level of commitment from the volunteers over this 10-year project. I think what's really interesting here, and this is something that Peter pointed out to me, which I thought was really interesting. So this is the diversity of pests and diseases reported. So as you can see in 2014, we were finding, or the volunteers were finding about 10 or so different pests and diseases. But as the years have gone by, we're now up to 40, nearly 50 different types of pests and diseases being reported by our volunteers. And I think that again demonstrates that commitment, the effort they're putting in, but also shows how their skills have developed and grown, and their confidence in recognizing and reporting pests and pathogens has improved significantly over the last few years. So again, great credit to our volunteers and the hard work that they put in. So I thought it would be quite good to actually think about how do we do this pest and disease review, what's the process, and what's the outcomes of that. So each and every year I am sent data from my colleagues in DEFRA who work in risk analysis, and they provide me a list of all the different organisms that have been added to the UK risk register in that year. And this is the sort of data that pops up to me. So obviously we're a project that's focusing on trees and woodlands, so we filter the data. If it doesn't cause damage to a tree, it's someone else's project. We also use unmitigated risk. So I talked about the risk ranging from 0 to 100. When we established the project, the lowest risk rating we had was 30. So we feel that is a sensible benchmark to continue to use because we need to focus on priorities. And then where we put the most effort into is it suitable for citizen science surveillance? And that's a lovely tongue twister. So does it have characteristic diagnostic features? So the damage that occurs to the plant, is that characteristic? Or if it's a pest, does the pest have certain features? If you think about, say, the Asian longhorn beetle and its beautiful longhorns, they're the sort of things that we need to provide our citizen scientists with something that they can reliably find on a regular basis if they were looking for it. It's obviously important it's visible from ground level. We don't encourage any climbing and we don't encourage any digging. And so therefore we don't want any invasive sampling. And importantly, although it's not a very often a problem, it mustn't be confused with a rare or red listed species. And what we don't want to do is disturb what species which are already under threat. So they're the features. Is it a tree? Does it have a risk rated greater than 30? Is it suitable for citizen science? And as you can see in that graph there I've just shown you, you can see the left-hand column, is it a tree, is in green. Does it have a UK risk register of greater than 30? If they're in red, they obviously don't. And you can see how we filter through the entire process to identify what could be added to the priority pest and disease list. So one really good example of this would be Xylella fastidiosa. It's on the UK risk register. It's of international concern, and not surprisingly, it's right up there as one of the most greatest threats to this country and to Europe in total. However, it doesn't meet the criteria of being suitable for citizen science surveillance. As you can see in this top right-hand picture, this is the symptoms of Xylella on an oak tree. I'm sure after last summer's extreme heat and temperature, all of us could find symptoms of Xylella fastidiosa in our gardens, our parks, and our woodlands, because the scorch-like symptoms are not diagnostic for Xylella fastidiosa. So although it's high profile, it's not suitable for a citizen science project. However, although it's not been raised to priority pest and disease, we do talk about it, and we have information and we have videos about the pathogen to raise awareness with our volunteers, but it's not a surveillance target for us. So how does the process go? So as I said, I get initial contact with DEFRA. Anastasia and her colleagues provide me with a list of the additions to the risk register in the past year. That generates that initial spreadsheet. I also look at the EPO alert list, which is the European Plant Protection Organisation that raises concerns around the rest of Europe. And I also consult with ology specialists. I'm sure they hate being called ology specialists, but I talk to my colleagues in mycology, bacteriology, virology, entomology, nematology. I will speak to anybody who has an opinion about what could be a concern, because they travel the world, they speak to colleagues, and they are aware of what really is in the long distance horizon. So we try to gather that information together. We then, as a partnership, we review that, and that's really thinking about what could be suitable for citizen science surveillance, and you won't fall over that. And then importantly, we then engage with our principal customers. We talk to DEFRA, who are responsible for plant health. There's the initial group, which is the surveillance group. We talk to them about what we've identified. It gives them an opportunity to comment on the suitability, whether that's adding value, and where they think we could be doing more to help. On the basis of that, it then gets escalated to the plant health risk group, normally around about April time. I won't be too hard on these dates. And we talk to plant health risk group, and this is a very large group of people across the whole of the UK. We explain to them what we've been doing, but we also talk to them about what we think could be potential priorities. And that's a really rich conversation we have with that group. Then comes back to the observatory partners. We then talk about what capability and capacity we have in the project to pick up a new priority pest and disease, and then we then put a recommendation to the board. Peter is responsible for that, and then on the basis of that, we then feel in a very confident position to take things forward. You might think that's a rather slow process, but it's really important that we consult widely and deeply across the UK Plant Health Service to make sure, because of the amount of effort that is required by us to develop the resources, but mainly because it's a lot of work for the volunteers to pick up a new priority pest and disease. So we need to make sure we're really confident and we've got it absolutely nailed down before we go. And sometimes we'll run a pilot like we did with beech leaf disease. That was very successful, so we did raise it to a full priority pest and disease. So again, this is just out of interest. This is just showing you the data that we did for 2022. Again, showing you the fact, the forestry, the unmitigated, and the suitability. So it's just showing you the sort of things that we might do. So, for example, the northern spruce engraver, Ips perturbatus, came out. It's an insect. Yes, it's forestry. It's got a high unmitigated risk at 60, and it is suitable for citizen science. It didn't on this occasion get raised to full priority pest and disease status, because we are already doing a lot of surveillance for beetles on spruce because of our work with great spruce bark beetle. So we felt we could cover that risk and that concern through our work with great spruce bark beetle and not the need to raise it to full status. So that's an interesting example for you. Again, this just came out of the GB strategy. I showed you that graph very early on of the line going up and all the different pests and pathogens. And I thought it'd be very interesting to look back at what's been introduced in the past 50 years to see whether there was any potential there for citizen science surveillance. And these are the three which were forestry based, and the one which I'm going to talk to you about is Lonsdaleia populi, which is a bacterial disease. So here it is, Lonsdaleia populi. It occurs on Populus hybrid clones, corkscrew willow, Salix Matsudana cultivar tortosa, thank you, Matt, and in the same species. So the bacterium that causes this very nasty canker disease is in the same genus that causes acute oak decline. And if that's not enough support of why we should be thinking about it of concern, then there is the example of it. So again, we have to think about all the criteria for the project. These are the very dramatic symptoms: longitudinal cracks on the lower trunk, so everything is above symptoms. Yeah, clear or white sap oozing from cankers. Again, so it has a very dramatic above ground symptom. It's on a forestry or woodland tree. So it is of considerable concern and worry, and I think it is something we felt could be appropriate to be raised to priority pests and diseases. Now, interesting, when we discussed that with colleagues across the UK Plant Health Service, they were in support of this as an idea, because again, poplar and willow is perhaps not something which gets the same level of surveillance, but it's the sort of places and trees that our volunteers encounter on a regular basis. So this is something we're thinking about quite seriously at the moment, bacterial canker of poplar and willow. This was another one that was brought to the table, actually by the Tree Council, I think, but a number of other colleagues brought it forward as well. It seems to be very topical at the moment. This is a sycamore, sooty bark disease, Cryptostoma corticale, and as you can see, it causes very, very dramatic symptoms, and it seems to be causing increasing problems across the whole of Europe. So again, good above ground dramatic symptoms on a readily identifiable tree. So there are many features which are very positive about it. This is the latest report. Rebecca pulled this up, which was very kind of her. Again, this is about sooty bark disease of sycamore is spreading in Europe. So again, it just shows the sort of level of interest about it across Northern Europe and parts of Europe as well. The main concern for us when we're being quite thoughtful and cautious about this is that sooty bark disease, as the name would suggest, produces a large number of sooty spores, and that's why it has its common name. Now, there is a slight concern in the background that these spores can be quite tricky for people who have depressed immunity. So there can be some hypersensitivity concerns. So we're just being quite careful about that as a risk. When we talked to the volunteers about this before, the general consensus was that they felt that risk could be manageable, because when we think about it, we are surveying for oak processionary moth, which again has same issues from a health and safety point of view. So if we manage the risks, then it could be potentially suitable for surveillance. So that's certainly on our thinking list going forward, but we're just watching that space to see what happens. So this was just really to look back. As Peter mentioned, I have been involved at the very start of the project, so it was useful just to reflect on what makes a good priority target pest and disease. So I've gone for essential and desirable. Sounds like a job interview. So it's essential that it's obviously, because we are observatory monitoring tree health, it has to be a tree, pest or pathogen. Of woodland or forest host species, we tend to keep away from sort of orchard trees, amenity trees to a certain extent. It needs to have a plant health policy concern. And importantly, it is essential that it is suitable for citizen science. It must be observable from ground level. It must not involve invasive sampling. To begin with, it might be that we ask our volunteers to go and sample invasively after the first report, but it can't be we can't dig or cut or slice. And we're looking for good diagnostic features. We want something that people can reliably identify in the field on the first time. Can't be confused with red listed or rare species. We need to be very considerate of biosecurity concerns. We need to make sure that we can manage the biosecurity of volunteers, which we do very successfully with other nasty pests and pathogens. And again, as I mentioned about sooty bark, we need to evaluate the health and safety, and we need to make sure that it is manageable. So for me, the desirable things are an identifiable host. It does make it a lot easier if you're confident with identifying that host. We need to limit the number of lookalikes. So there's no point in asking our volunteers to go and look for a pest or disease, and there's 4 or 5 other things that look very like it. We're going to get loads of false reports. It's not going to be very rewarding for the volunteer to find out they've reported the wrong thing. So we need to think very carefully about whether the pest has particularly diagnostic features or the damage it causes, again, is very characteristic. Obviously, it's desirable it's listed on the UK risk register, but obviously it's quite a fast-paced process, so that's not essential, but it is desirable. We want it to be a high priority pest, and we're looking for a risk register score above 30. So they're the essential and the desirables, and I think all our 23 tick all those boxes. I think really importantly that certainly for me, the reflection when I started off in this project and how we've moved on is to realise there must be a fair balance between the requirements of the UK Plant Health Service and the plant health scientists and the needs and the demands and the rewards for citizen scientists. So there has to be reciprocal benefits to both parties. And importantly, it's really essential we remember that citizen science is here to augment but not replace statutory services. So think very carefully and mindfully about that balance. Now, I had a great time last week. I went up to Sheffield and I met some of the lead volunteers, and I posed the question, you know, what do you want from the project? What do you think makes a good priority pest and disease? So again, that was quite interesting. They really liked the fact that it was important. They were of plant health significance. Whether that's of national concern, something like, say, emerald ash borer, everybody wants to keep that out that country, but also of local impact. So, for example, horse chestnut leaf miner in parts of Scotland, you know, are of concern to those local volunteers. So plant health significance is key. I talked about the mix of presence or absence. And again, very much good positive feedback about, you know, it's nice to go out and survey for something and find something. Also, as importantly, it's just nice as well not to find something. So we need to get that balance right, and I think we do that very well in that project. And again, it's important to exercise those reporting skills. Of limited distribution, couldn't find it. So again, the volunteers, I think, really enjoy not finding something. And sometimes that data can be quite difficult to articulate. You know, if you spent the afternoon going out, right, what did you do this afternoon? I spent all afternoon not finding emerald ash borer. It doesn't quite have the same wow factor, but actually that's really valuable data. It's so, so important. And then we also talked about the number. And I think we've always been slightly cautious of not trying to overload our volunteers, because you can see the amount of knowledge and skills they need to maintain and exercise at all time. So we've always talked about sort of 20 to 25 being about right. It does sound a lot to be proficient in, but I think some of the volunteers commented very interestingly that of those 23, not all of them are relevant to the region that they live in. So actually you may shorten that list quite significantly. And also to remember that yes, it is 23 pests and diseases, but actually it's on a more limited range of hosts. So again, that was really helpful indeed to think about that. I think. So really, I think it is hopefully just giving you a review of how we identify priority pests and diseases, the mechanisms that we use, the people who are involved and the considerable engagement that we have, and some examples of some of the emerging pests and pathogens. And when I started this project, you know, this is about trees, this is about tree health. What I've realized is this project is about trees, it is about tree health, but it's about people. And certainly from my personal reflection, you know, I've been involved in the project from the start. I've been involved in plant health for over 30 years. And this is the best project I've ever been involved in. It is the most impactful, it is the most enjoyable, and that's because of the people I work with, not only with the staff in my own organisation, but under the leadership of Peter and Rebecca. We have some fantastic project partners. But the thing I like best about it is the people I work with. The citizen scientists are absolutely outstanding, and we would be nothing without them. So thank you to all the citizen scientists for all their hard work and for all their effort over a 10-year period. And on that point, I shall stop, if that's okay, Peter.